Okay, good day everyone. So what I'd like to do in this video is just focus on one of the most basic aspects of R and simply discuss how it is you use the command console and the scripting editor. Now, admittedly, these are pretty fundamental concepts that many of you are already going to be familiar with, but I still think it's important that we cover this aspect specifically because a lot of viewers are not going to have any background in programming, and I think it'll be useful for them to just sort of touch upon this stuff before we start getting into more complex topics. So the only assumption I'm really going to make here is that you've installed the R environment and potentially R Studio on your computer. If you haven't done that yet, I encourage you to go back and watch the video that I made on that specifically because kind of the content of that video is going to be prerequisite for what we do here. So why don't we do this first? Let's fire up the base R environment. Okay, so I've got the base R environment fired up here. And one of the first things you'll see is this window here. And notice this window is titled R console. And similarly, if we fire up R Studio, what you'll see is we have this tab here called console. So this console pane and this console window that we're looking at really represents the command console that I kind of briefly mentioned in the install video. So this is where we're going to be inputting our instructions or our commands, if you prefer, to the computer using the R language. Moreover, this is also where we're going to see a lot of the computer's output of those commands that it executes. Now, inside the console, you should see a small little greater than symbol. So this symbol denotes what is called the command line's prompt. So that's the technical term for it. In other words, it denotes the space in which you type commands to your computer using R code. And additionally, the presence of this symbol also indicates that the computer is currently awaiting our command. So if you don't see a small little greater than sign, that's probably an indication that the computer is currently in the process of doing something like, maybe it's executing some code. So let's do this. Let's just type 1 + 1 into this console tab here. And then let's hit enter. Now, as soon as you hit enter, you should immediately see a value of 2 pop up quite straightforwardly. So in programming lingo, we would say that the expression 1 + 1 here is a line of R code. And pressing enter or return on the keyboard executes or runs this code. And the value 2 here is the resulting output. Now I realize, that's obvious to many of you, but I know that a sizable portion of you are not going to be familiar with this kind of jargon, so it's good to maybe just get a bit used to it. And similarly, if we head back to the base R environment, we can do the same thing. So you can see 1 + 1, quite straightforwardly, equals 2. Now, if you close R in R Studio here, let's just close this, and we'll close this. And then reopen them, what you'll find is any history of that calculation we just made will be gone. So if we reopen the R environment, you can see the 1 + 1 is not there anymore. Similarly, if we fire up R Studio, the 1 + 1 that we typed is gone, as is the output of 2. So what this kind of entails is typing commands into this console window. It offers us a nice quick way to perform kind of simple tasks that we're not necessarily interested or kind of concerned with preserving. However, in most cases, we're going to be typing R code that we do want to preserve. It's going to be R code that we not only want to preserve, but that we want to run, that we want to edit, that we want to add to at a later date. And this is really where the concept of a script becomes quite important. So a script is simply a text document on your computer that contains R code that you've written. So to open a scripting window in the base R environment, what you would do is you just go File, New Script, and you can see that opens up a window here, and you can type stuff into this window. Similarly, in RStudio, you can just go File, New File, RScript, and we could make that a little bigger. And again, you can just type stuff into this. Once you have a scripting window, once you have a scripting window opened, you can then, and you've typed some R code into it, you can then save this in kind of the conventional manner you would most word processing applications. So if you just go File, Save As, you can then save your script. So for instance, let's type the following. Let's say 1 + 1, then we'll move to a new line, we'll type 2 + 2, we'll move to a new line, and we'll type 3 + 3. Okay, and let's pretend we want to save this. So we'll just go File, Save As, and we'll put it on the desktop, and we'll call it temp, because we'll probably not keep this. Now notice, when you save it, RStudio is trying to save this as a .r file. So a .r file is simply a script, like a movie script, but it's, specifically of R code. So if you don't happen to see a type of file listed here, then what that probably indicates is that you don't have your computer presently configured to display file name extensions, which is okay. You'll still be able to save this. So just in case you don't know, a file name extension is simply a suffix that is added to the end of a computer's file name, so that basically your computer knows what types of software can be used to access and read that file. So if we save this, let's just close RStudio, and we'll close this as well. What you can see is on my desktop, I now have temp.r, and that .r is the file name extension. So you might not see that .r on there, but and this is really because a lot of modern computers by default don't actually display file name extensions, and this is essentially to prevent users from accidentally deleting the file extension when they rename a file. So if I go to rename this, right, you'll notice Windows lets me delete the file extension, which is a bad thing. Because deleting the file extension would actually ruin the computer's ability to read the file properly. So it's kind of understandable why companies like Microsoft and Apple kind of hide the file extensions from the users. However, particularly when programming, file extensions are quite useful things to see. So you can actually configure your computer to display them like I have here. It's a pretty simple process, and if you're curious how to do it, just a quick internet search can kind of teach you. So just do a quick internet search for like display file name extensions, Windows or Mac, or whatever your operating system happens to be. So now that we have this saved, what we can do is if we head back over to something like RStudio, what we can do is we can just go File, Open File, head over to the desktop, and you can see there it is, temp.r. So if we select that, hit open, you can see there is the code that we typed. And the nice part about working with an environment like the R environment or the RStudio environment is that we can straightforwardly send these lines of code to the console. So for instance, if you take your mouse and you place it on, a line of your choosing, so we'll place it on the second line here. If you now hit the Run button up here at the top, you can see it instantly runs that code, or rather it sends the code to the console and executes it. Similarly, in the base R environment, we can do the same thing. So we'll open up that same script, desktop. There it is. So you can see there's the script. So we could put it on like the second line here, and we could go Edit, Run Line or Selection. And then if you look at our console window, you can see it now says 2 + 2 is 4. Additionally, if you want to run multiple lines of code, you can do that as well. So if I highlight the bottom 2 lines and I hit Run, you can see both those lines get run. If I want to run everything, I can just highlight everything, hit Run, and it all runs. Now, it's really at this juncture that I should mention a pretty handy feature of programming environments, specifically keyboard shortcuts. So all good programming environments provide their users with the ability to do like every conceivable task via their keyboard in some way. Learning the shortcuts for features that you use quite frequently can actually make the whole process of writing code a considerably more kind of time efficient process, and it can make it a lot more effortless. In theory, right? And in theory, a good programmer who's using kind of a competently developed coding environment should never actually require the use of a mouse. Our studio in particular here offers the user quite a wide range of keyboard shortcuts, and you can actually customize these to your own preferences if you desire, but the defaults are actually pretty good. So for instance, if you go to the help menu here at the top and you just go down to keyboard shortcuts help and you click that, you can get a whole big list of all of the keyboard shortcuts that our studio has. Now, I'm not suggesting you go out of your way to memorize all of these. You don't need to do that. The simple act of just using keyboard shortcuts consistently will be sufficient to learn them pretty effortlessly. So at the outset, what I'd actually recommend is just select a few shortcuts and attempt to use them consistently while you code. Maybe what you could do is, you could just keep maybe a basic text document on your desktop as a reminder of a few useful shortcuts until you're kind of firmly in the habit of using them, and then, add a few more to the list. And what I think we should do is maybe just touch upon some of the more helpful keyboard shortcuts. So, one of the most used shortcuts is kind of the run shortcut. So if you put your cursor on a line of code here, so we've got it on the second line, and you just press Control Enter, what you can see is it instantly runs that line of code and it moves the cursor down to the next line of code. So that was just Control Enter. And I think if you're on a Mac, it might be Command Enter. I'm not 100% sure. Now, another shortcut that I find quite useful is Control plus L. So you'll notice in our console window here, we have kind of all of these outputs and all of these inputs, and then we've got all this text up here. But if you press Control plus L, it will clear everything in the console. So this is a really nice, useful keyboard shortcut, because a lot of times your console can get pretty cluttered pretty fast. And again, I think if you're on a Mac, it's possible this could be Command L, but it might also just be Control L. Now, if we take our cursor and we just put it at the end of the line, kind of a useful feature of keyboards generally is if you hit the home key, so that's this key right here. If you hit the home key, watch what happens to the cursor. So you hit the home key and you'll notice the cursor jumps to the beginning of the line. So that's quite useful because sometimes you have kind of long lines of code and you're typing and then you realize, oh, you made a slight mistake kind of over here. So what you could do is you can just hit the home key and that'll jump to the front of the line. Additionally, if you hit the end key, it jumps to the end of the line. So you can jump to the beginning of the line using the home key, and you can jump to the end of the line using the end key. Additionally, if you hold down the Control key and then you use your left and right arrow keys, what that will do is that will cause the cursor to jump basically one section at a time. So so just to illustrate, suppose I have like some words here. If I hold down the Control key and then I press the left arrow, what you can see is the cursor is actually jumping word by word. So that's a pretty handy feature. It's a lot more handy than just using the arrow keys by themselves, which only move kind of character by character. Now, another nifty feature is you can actually highlight text using your keyboard. So if you hold down the Shift key and then you use your arrow keys, you can highlight chunks of a line. And you can move left and right. You can also move up and down. So for instance, suppose I want to run the top two lines of code. I could just have my cursor here, hold down Shift, type the down arrow key, and then press Control Enter, you can see those two lines of code are quite straightforwardly run. And similarly, you can apply the Control key to help highlight stuff as well. So if we hold down Control Shift, you can see now it highlights kind of word by word there. Another kind of useful feature is, suppose your cursor is located in the console window here. If that's the case, then what you can do is you can just press Control 1, and that will send the cursor to the script window. Similarly, if you press Control 2, that will send the cursor back to the console window. So Control 1 brings the cursor to the script, Control 2 brings the cursor to the console. And kind of the last keyboard shortcut that I think you should know about is the Alt- sign. So when you press Alt-, you can see that draws a little arrow here, a little arrow operator. And this is something that's going to be useful to us later on. So this is a pretty handy shortcut to know about. Now, just to finish up here, when you're utilizing these shortcuts, it's worth remembering that a standard QWERTY-style keyboard, like you see right at the bottom of my screen here, these keyboards are symmetrically designed. So modifier keys like the Shift key and the Control key and the Alt key, those are located on both the on both the left and the right sides of the keyboard. And this is not by accident. So a lot of people kind of fail to realize how useful this actually is and never learn to use this layout of keyboard properly. So I'll sort of illustrate with an example here. If you want to type capital letters, you should always use the Shift key on the opposite side of the keyboard to the letter. So let's say you want to type the capital letter Q. What you should do is you should depress the right Shift key with your right hand, and you should type Q with your left hand. And a similar logic applies to the modifier keys. So for something like this arrow, what you want to do is you want to press Alt with your left hand, and you want to type the minus sign with your right hand. Okay, you shouldn't be trying to do, to depress both keys with a single hand like this. Okay, because what you'll just kind of end up doing is you'll just end up basically straining your hand and kind of slowing down your typing. And I know that for many of you, advice like this is quite obvious, but you'd actually be shocked at how many people never actually learn to essentially use a keyboard properly, and they develop all kinds of bad habits as a result. So I feel like it's worth pointing out to just, save some of you from some unnecessary strain on your hands.